I'm going to run through a few slides on investment trends, what investors are doing, whether they're buying logistics and retail, and what's driving logistics and retail in different cities and locations across Europe. So this is a bit of analysis on a select group of global investors, different global domiciles, Asia, Australian, European, North American. 2010 shows what they were holding in terms of their portfolio. In 2018 it shows how it's changed. So still office is dominant, then retail, but then we're seeing a lot more growth into I&L, industrial logistics, resi, hotels and development. But if you look at the momentum, there's a lot more momentum behind resi, industrial logistics, hotel, a lot more behind development than there is in retail and offices. But interestingly, retail ahead of office. If you look at global investor trends, retail yellow, pale blue is industrial. Retail's actually started to come back in 2018, which is interesting. But industrial is also creeping up and getting much closer to it. But again, the big one's resi. If we look at Europe, we don't quite see that trend yet. So retail market share in terms of volumes has been gradually declining. Industrial's been creeping up slightly. Took a dip last year, interestingly, but that doesn't reflect all activity or all money moving into the sector, because a lot of it has gone into big JV platforms. Yeah, so lots and lots of big institutional capital has been put into platforms with big pan-European logistics developers. And that capital continues to consolidate because some of these platforms have already been sold. Not just one, but two. And more institutional capital coming in and new players coming into the market. So lots more Asian capital coming in, with GLP in particular, CIC and GIC having a big role. What's also interesting about the logistics side is there's more niche funds that are being set up to invest in the sector. So even retail investors putting money into a logistics fund. So Mayer Bergman in that case. Oaktree and Heathside Capital, we've done a bit of work for. They're looking at air cargo logistics, very specifically, just that, nothing else. Real Term, a new investor coming in with a lot of US experience, really just looking at cross-docking. Cross-docking in Europe and Indian logistics. They're putting a lot of money into that. So what's driving that growth in logistics? Well, it is predominantly about e-retailing. Yep. So e-retailing has been a big driver, changing the way we shop, or allowing us to shop, and that's driving the need for a lot more modern logistics space. But if we look at the trends going forward, the growth in e-retailing it's still growing, but the rate of growth is declining, even though total consumption is rising. Yeah. So we're starting to see it hit penetration levels in different markets. So this is e-retailing rates across different countries. The bar represents where we are today. The blue bar represents where the different countries could get to in 2022. So the UK looks like it's fully penetrated. Yeah. There's still a bit of movement in Denmark, the Netherlands, and quite a few different countries, but also very different levels of e-retailing across country. And that's not just it's a technology thing, but it's a cultural thing. It's very much about different cultures shop and do things in different ways. So if we look at the Dutch, everything is digital. So Ideal is their system. That's the way that they buy things more than anything else. Poland still pays with a lot of cash. And here in France, they still pay by check. Yeah. So very, very different. We're not all digital. Yeah? And that affects the different rates of e-retailing. In the UK, it's very much about click and collect. So that's the big online thing. So click and collect is much higher in the UK than it is in different countries. And that's also changing the way that people buy online. They're buying online, but they're picking up their goods in stores. Not just the store they bought it from, but other stores nearby, yeah, or nearby to where they live. Not necessarily home delivery. Different rates in different countries. But also in the UK, what we're seeing is a kickback into retail through things like showrooming. So not just retailers or online retailers, but manufacturers branding their goods on high streets, major high streets. Yeah. And a lot of retailers have now realized that if they actually keep a presence on the high street or in a good shopping center location, it actually drives the online traffic. So it's almost a reverse engineering of retail driving online, not the other way around. Will we see that across different countries? Maybe, I think we will. The other key thing for online retailers is profitability. So we've looked at quite a range of different retailers, pure play, the ones that operate on omni-channel and the ones that are traditional retailers. The online retailers get very, very tight margins, so really almost zero profitability. Omni-channel gets good profit, but benefits from scale. traditional retailers get good profit, but less scale. So omni-channel certainly is the way forward, is the way it's going to change. If you look at grocery in the UK now, we look at it almost separately to retail as a different asset class, because very little grocery sales are done online. If you look at companies like Ocado, it was going to be the big thing 10, 15 years ago. Ocado's market share at the end of last year was 1%. And now they don't exist. They're a technology company. I don't think it'd help because their distribution centre burnt down, but there you go. That's one way to get out of the market. But collectively, a lot more shopping. Yes, it's online. Yes, it's click and collect, but we're still going to be buying and picking things up in stores. If we look at logistics requirements, this one's quite interesting. So again, how do you serve cities with modern logistics? So cross-docking, e-fulfillment, or micro-hubs in cities. So this is a survey done by our German team in terms of what occupiers wanted and what developers and investors thought they wanted. So obviously in terms of where these things are, they're quite different. So your e-fulfillment, cross-docking is around the edges of cities, not in the cities, but micro-hubs needs to be in next to the urban populations. But in terms of the size requirements, or how much of that is required, so your micro-hubs are 3,000 square meters and less, definitely. Your cross-docking, your bigger logistics is the bigger scale stuff. But the tenants want the bigger stuff, not the smaller stuff. And lots of German investors and developers thought they wanted the smaller stuff and not so much the bigger stuff. So there's a bit of a disconnect between what occupiers actually want and need relative to what some of the market thinks they need. So how do you deliver this in cities? Well, within a city, you're not going to get just a pure logistics product to work, because you're not going to get the rents to drive gross development value to match existing use values. And it's about blending it with other uses, with retail, with office, and particularly with residential. Resi as a investment sector in Europe is growing, but it's still nowhere near the scale of what it is in the US. It's about half of it. And urban population growth is going to change that, because as urban populations grow, the one thing they definitely need is houses. Yeah. And then, as these neighbourhoods are built and resi is built, what do people want near their neighbourhoods? The top two things, apart from access to good public transport, is shops and leisure. So you've got to blend all those things to make mixed-use communities work. But again, retail doesn't have to be what it used to be, or leisure doesn't have to be what it used to be. We're seeing it look very different to 10 years ago. So the picture in the top left, there's a guy that's connected to the British royal family who wants to set up pop-up horse racing events across the globe. So this is one that he's planning to do on the Champs-Élysées. He's planning to do one over Sydney Harbour Bridge, down Pall Mall. I don't think you'll get one down Rochdale High Street, but again, it's just a different way of diversifying how we use locations and bring in leisure and pop-up, not just events, pop-up retail. It can constantly change how a city or a location works. Whether you like your vegan sausage rolls or not. Greggs is a very successful retailer in the UK, but you probably won't see Greggs on the Champs-Élysées either. But it's all about mixing gyms, mixing F&B, and making these facilities, or these neighbourhoods, town centres, high streets work. If we think of different cities and how they've expanded and how they've grown, such as London, yeah, it's a lot about public transport. Stratford, Battersea, White City, they've seen the biggest growth in terms of major office occupiers moving from the centre into these new sort of inner city locations. But they've all got a very strong element of retail as much as public transport. Certainly Stratford, White City is Westfield. Battersea is a really interesting development, and it's much more individual occupiers, retailers that are moving into the city. I think there's a restaurateur called Mother from Copenhagen. It's the first move. It's made out of Denmark, and they're bringing in niche little operators into that area and turning it into just a very interesting place to live and work. In France, again, I think France or Paris is behind where London is in terms of its growth. But again, new metro system being built in Paris, and it's pushing the city out. Big occupiers have already started to move into the inner suburbs, so expect to see a lot more opportunities in the inner suburbs of Paris for retail. Again, Amsterdam overspill, moving out to the north of the city to Sloterdijk, a lot of resi, a lot of retail, a lot of offices, changing the way that city works. Again, a lot of demand going into the city, so they have to spread outwards. For smaller towns, what is the solution? You know, a lot of UK high streets are really struggling. So I'm sure everybody's heard of this town in Belgium, Roeselare. Everybody? Yes. Apparently it is the model for how UK high street should work. This is where it is in West Flanders. But it's pretty interesting when you actually look at it, and there's a guy called Bill Grimesy who set out this kind of research solution for how UK high streets could work, it could change. They've actually adopted a lot of what he said, and they've got this town centre to work. You know, it's pedestrianising it, it's taking car parking out of the centre, putting it to the edge, to make the whole town managed, you know, a whole town centre management plan. Free Wi-Fi, there's a free app which runs incentives for all the different stores that are on there. Any vacant stores that there are, I think they've got it down to about 6%. The storefronts are all animated so they don't look vacant, but they've just completely changed how the city works. And it's a small town, 60,000, so there's no reason that other UK towns or other European small towns can't adopt a similar solution. So what will cities look like, and you know, where's the demand going to be for retail and logistics? Still quite a bit of demand around port-based, and we'll come onto that very shortly. And definitely big demand for big distribution centres, big box across Europe, because as we see the growth in omni-channel, you have to have modern logistics to actually service that retail. In and around cities, you know, a lot of European cities are now going car-free, or trying to go as car-free as possible. So that's going to maybe create an opportunity for cross-stocking. Big trucks coming into the edge of the city, small e-vans then moving across the city. And then you've got your dominant shopping centres on the edge, retail parks. I think it's going to be a tricky one. It'll just depend on every different location. And then within the cities, it's about communities, it's about neighbourhoods, which is essentially how a lot of cities emerge, just different neighbourhoods agglomerating together. And it's just having a whole mix of uses to make it work, different solutions for different cities, but they've got to be digital as well. And then when we look at a broader scale for Europe, in terms of how we look at it, so we split Europe into about 7 different regions. This is region number 1, northern France, Benelux, the German Rhineland. It's all interconnected, highly densely populated, and that's our number 1 region for logistics. You've also got a lot of throughput coming through the ports, and there's a lot of new infrastructure being put into that region, which is actually taking freight off the road and running it along the waterways, along the canals, and making it more sustainable. Region number 2 is the UK. HS2 will probably create lots more opportunities in the UK as well going forward. Then we've got this region, which is the rest of Germany and core CE. That's our region number 3. Then northern Italy, or the Alpine region, which actually spreads into Lyon and along the coast to here. Then you've got the Nordics, then you've got Iberia, and then you've got Southeastern Europe. But there's lots and lots of new infrastructure plays being made across Europe, which is going to change the market. You know, Piraeus port is owned by the Chinese. They've built a rail freight route, which has so far got into the northern area of Serbia. They're trying to get into Hungary, and they're trying to run their goods from China straight up into Budapest and then getting them across to Europe. So expect this to change as well. Whether they'll get that one through the EU or not, who knows? But lots of opportunities across Europe for distribution, logistics, big box. And then if we put that in a global perspective, you know, how does different sectors in Europe compare to other global locations? In terms of yield spreads, the most interesting one globally is European logistics. Then European offices, then Asian logistics, then European retail. So purely from a yield spread perspective to global investors, and we are seeing a lot more global capital moving into Europe. You know, these sectors look very interesting.
Sorry, what's the yield spread against?
It's the yield against bond. Yeah. There you go. Okay. So, summary. Europe is a good end of cycle yield spread play for lots of global investors. One other factor that really favors big distribution logistics is less capex. You know, as we need mixed tenure, flexible lease developments, retail, office in cities, that involves a lot of capex. DC logistics doesn't. There's a lot of opportunities on logistics following infrastructure, and in towns it's all about omni-channel. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more growth in the 2 sectors.
Western Europe, is there any possibilities for shopping centre development? It still is in Central Europe, but is it a finished market in Western Europe?
In terms of addition to stock, probably. Replacement stock, no. So replacing and changing different centres, that's still an opportunity, but big dominant shopping centres, I think that one's pretty much done. And lots of different countries don't really depend as much on big shopping centres as Central Eastern Europe does, or the Nordics do. A lot of it is open air. It's a lot around high street. You know, the Dutch market is very much like that. Not so much shopping centres. And again, that's a cultural thing.
But shopping centre, physical shopping is a lot more fashionable in Central Europe rather than Western Europe. People tend not to do online shopping as much.
Not as much. Yeah, not as much. You know, if you looked at the figures for Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, it's tiny. People just shop and behave differently in those countries.
But will that stay the same, or?
I think that balance will remain the same unless there's a massive change in cultures, which there probably won't be. You know, the Nordics. I used to live in the Nordics for 6 years. A lot of that is big, dominant shopping centres. So that's a climatic thing. You don't want to go walking down the high street in Helsinki on a February afternoon, unless you're wrapped up and you're like -28. So there's a big there's a big factor there in terms of climatic. What's also interesting about a lot of Finnish shopping centres is they have a lot of public services and libraries at the heart of some of their shopping centres, and it just drives footfall. Yeah, anyway.